Kia ora koutou, and thank you for joining me for the short video to talk about how to read the Bible. And I just wanted to focus in on this video on the context of what we're actually reading when we're reading the Bible. And so oftentimes we maybe go to our favorite verses. They might be one verse or two verses out of a chapter of the Bible. And we go, oh, cool, I know the meaning of what this is. But those two verses are actually written in context. And so they may be written in the context of a chapter or even of a whole book of the Bible. So if you're fortunate enough to have a study Bible, which let me just grab my study Bible here to show you what I'm talking about, you might have a page right at the start of the book that you are reading that gives you a bit of context as to when this book was written, who wrote it, who it was written to, why it might have been written, and maybe some other things as well. So it might have some context about where the Israelites were at the time of it being writing, because we're looking at Malachi here, so it was the Old Testament, or what part of Israel it was written to, or the extended Roman Empire when the books of the New Testament were written. So I think it's really important, if you are fortunate enough to have one of those study Bibles, to have a bit of a read of that first page of the book of the Bible. If you're not fortunate enough to have a study Bible, how about going to something like the Blue Letter Bible, which is an online source of information around the Bible, and it usually has a little bit of a summary that you can search for on a particular book of the Bible. You can go into way more depth at a place like the Blue Letter Bible, but we're just wanting sort of like a little bit of a summary of the book of the Bible. The other thing I mentioned is the context within the chapter. And so we might have some favorite verses, but taken out of context, we might actually be trying to apply them in a way that they were never supposed to be applied. So we do need to read the whole chapter as well as that little bit of contextual information right at the start of the book that we're in. By reading the chapter, that gives us a bit of an understanding as to who this bit of text might have been spoken to, or the context of where it is. Now, when I'm thinking about verses of the Bible that can sometimes be taken out of context, one of the favorite ones, and I love this verse, don't get me wrong, is the verse in Jeremiah when it says that God has plans for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you. That's a wonderful verse, but we do actually need to set it into the context of where it is before we start randomly applying it to our lives and think that we won't ever have any struggles in this life that God's got. He might have fabulous plans for us, but he also mentions a little bit later in the Bible that we will have suffering. And so those plans might be great, but they might include some hard stuff as well. And that context of that verse could actually give us that this is not everything's going to be going a hunky dory 100% of the time. The context actually shows us that nothing was going right for the Israelites at the time of those verses being written, and that it was actually looking into the future, that there was plans that God had for Israel that were plans to prosper them. And so that context gives us a little bit more of an understanding on how we should be applying it in our lives, that particular verse, or even potentially whether it should actually be applied to our lives as well. Because sometimes the context is like, you're like, oh, okay. I have nothing that I can hang that on. That context is so different to how I'm living now. Maybe I need to do some praying to God to ask how that I would actually apply that, because it's not going to be applied quite in the way that I thought it was. So, just some thoughts around context of Bible verses that we might be interested in reading or have as favorite Bible verses, or maybe stick up on a mirror or somewhere around our house to help us learn the Bible. That context is really important. Mā te wā.